Hello, I'm Katty Kay in Washington. The result of the U.S. presidential election still hangs in the balance. They are counting in a few key swing states, and the result is still too close to call. But we have just been told that President Donald Trump is going to make a statement from the White House any minute now. We can show you the live picture of the briefing room at the moment. That is all the TV networks. They've been told to send their correspondents there and their TV cameras there. And we want to bring you that live and see what the president has to say. We haven't heard from the president in person, of course, since election night, when he came out at about 2 a.m. in the morning on Wednesday and said that he believed he had already won the election. He has been tweeting a lot today about votes and wanting the vote count to be stopped. The White House has also launched several lawsuits in different states to try and get the vote count either stopped or to have their monitors in there watching it. We have the BBC's Anthony Zerka, our North America reporter, who is watching this with me. Anthony, are you getting any heads up about what we might expect the president to say this evening?
Well, I think we're going to hear from Donald Trump. He's going to talk about how he's encouraged by the signs in Pennsylvania and Florida and Georgia. He thinks he's still going to win those states. He's encouraged by Arizona. He thinks he's going to take the lead there. Biden leads there currently. I think he also may lash out at the polling that was conducted before the election that showed that he was losing, that the call of Arizona by some U.S. networks, which he might say is an attempt at voter suppression, that why would people wait in line in Arizona to vote if they think that the state was already slipping away. He also may tout some of the Republican successes on Tuesday night in down-ballot races. Although the Democrats picked up one Senate seat, they were hoping for more. The Republicans held on to seats in contested races in places like Iowa, Maine, and North Carolina. It looks like they're also going to pick up seats in the House of Representatives when the polls suggested that the Democrats might actually have gains. And then even in state legislative races in places like Texas and Iowa and Minnesota, the Republicans did better than expected. So he might claim credit for that, might claim some form of victory for those down-ballot successes, and then say that he still thinks he can win this presidential race, and he thinks that the leads that he has in places like Georgia and Pennsylvania are going to hold up.
Anthony, we've had a lot of tweeting from the president today. Actually, we should say that two of the tweets that the president sent out about the nature of the race and the nature of the vote counting have been flagged by Twitter as being misleading about the election. But he's tweeted a couple of times, "Stop the vote." That is clearly something that he still wants to happen. We've also had members of his family, his sons, tweeting criticism of other Republican members of the Republican Party. Is there a sense in the White House that Republican grandees have not rallied to the president's defense as vociferously as he would like them to do?
I think there clearly is some anger within the White House towards members of the Republican Party for not being active enough in defending Donald Trump and in echoing his allegations of widespread voter fraud. I think that you've seen from the Republican leadership in Congress, from Mitch McConnell on down, that they have been taking a distance from the administration right now. And if you look at press events that the Trump campaign had been holding in the states while they've been announcing these legal challenges, they've been run by people like Rudy Giuliani in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump's personal lawyer, and Rick Grinnell, who used to be the director of national intelligence and the U.S. ambassador to Germany in Las Vegas. These are people who are not Republican office holders. These are Donald Trump loyalists who have been with him for a very long time, but who also do not have political careers to defend and do not have to think about a future, conceivably, without Donald Trump if he were to lose this election. So, as you mentioned, Eric Trump had a tweet accusing the Republicans of being sheep and that their voters would remember if they don't sufficiently defend them. I think that's a warning shot to members of the Republican Party that Donald Trump is not going to go anywhere, that he does have a loyal base, and that if the Republican office holders, if the Republican establishment don't start defending him more, that base may turn against them. It certainly has used that as a cudgel against the Republican Party in the past.
Yeah, and one conservative commentator tweeted out commenting that there had been not one tweet from Lindsey Graham of South Carolina in the past 24 hours, and Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, retweeted that with the caption, "No one is surprised." I mean, clearly taking aim at some conservative figures who have been loyal supporters, as you say, of the president's, but for not coming out vocally enough. We also understand that there has been a row between the president and the Trump campaign and Fox News. The Trump campaign today criticizing some of the employees of Fox News, saying that they are too Democratic leaning, suggesting that Fox News has not been in the president's camp enough. I wonder whether we might hear something about that this evening too. And by the way, the president himself is billing this as a press conference, not as a statement. And the fact that he's doing it in a briefing room suggests that this may go on for a while and that he will be taking questions. Do you think he might talk about Fox? I imagine he'll be asked about it.
I wouldn't be surprised at all, because the reports that we heard even on election night was as soon as Fox called Arizona a key swing state for Joe Biden, that angered the members of the Trump campaign to the point where reportedly, according to a New York Times report, Donald Trump himself called Rupert Murdoch, the head of News Corp, and asked him to revoke that call. You've seen feuds between Donald Trump and Fox in the past. Recently, he's been accusing the Fox polling of being biased against him, the independent polling that Fox has done on the presidential race. Now, of course, you remember in Donald Trump's first presidential campaign back in 2015, he had a feud with Fox anchor Megyn Kelly. He actually sat out a debate in Iowa that was hosted by Fox, protesting Fox News' coverage. They made amends. Obviously, Fox became very favorable in Donald Trump's view. He would show up on Fox doing interviews with Sean Hannity and the morning show on Fox regularly. That was his primary source, not only of communicating with his base, but also, it seems, as a consumer of Fox News. He would get his information from Fox News. You would see him tweeting about news stories that would appear on Fox News just minutes after they aired. So if Donald Trump may feel a bit betrayed by Fox's decision on Arizona on election night, and he could very easily air those grievances and will definitely, I think, be asked about them if this becomes a press conference. And there have been White House press conferences or White House events that have been billed as press conferences in the past that
where
have
he
just
didn't
ended
take
up being a
questions.
statement
Yeah,
and
you're
he
right.
leaves.
That's true. I mean, it is interesting watching what Republicans are saying today, because you've got several. I mean, I'm looking at a statement from Senator Pat Toomey, who is the Republican senator from Pennsylvania, who put out a statement today saying that all votes that comply with Pennsylvania law must be counted regardless of how long the process takes. And then he went on to say, once a final count is reached and certified, all parties involved must accept the outcome of the election, regardless of whether they won or lost. I mean, he recognizes this legal dispute that has been going on when the Supreme Court said we want any votes that arrive in Pennsylvania at the election centers after Election Day. There's a 3-day grace window. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, ballots are still allowed to be counted. But the Supreme Court came to an accommodation, if you like, that those ballots will be separated out. And Pat Toomey is recognizing that is going on and thinks that's a good idea. But, you know, when the president has Republicans like that, basically also sending a message, they know who is listening to this. This is for an audience of one person. And there is Senator Toomey, a Republican senator from Pennsylvania, saying publicly, look, the vote must be counted. It must take as long as it's legally allowed to take. And once the outcome has been declared, it must be accepted. We're getting a fascinating indication of what is happening, the maneuverings in the Republican Party around Donald Trump, as Republicans start to believe that the numbers suggest Joe Biden has a greater chance of becoming the next president than Donald Trump does. He's not there yet. No one is declaring any winner. It would be wrong for Joe Biden to declare a winner. It would be wrong for Donald Trump to declare a winner. Donald Trump has no reason to come out right now and concede. The votes are still being counted. But it's really interesting to watch how the Republican Party is kind of maneuvering around this realization, isn't it, Anthony?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And you're right. This election is not over. The count is not over yet. Joe Biden has more pathways to becoming president than Donald Trump does right now. Pennsylvania by itself would decide this election if Joe Biden wins it. If Joe Biden loses it, then 2 out of 3 of Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia would win it for him as well, whereas Donald Trump would have to win Pennsylvania and 2 out of 3 of those states. I think it's interesting you talk about Toomey. He is retiring, so he doesn't have to worry so much about a future in the Senate and angering Donald Trump's base. But I think there's a very real possibility that there are members of the Republican Party who are thinking, well, you know, we have the Senate, it seems. We made progress in the House of Representatives, narrowing the Democratic lead. We have control of the Supreme Court with all of these nominees that Donald Trump put on there. Is it so bad if, you know, we have to deal with Joe Biden? Do we want to burn that bridge and risk our political careers sticking our neck out on the line for Donald Trump, whereas, you know, maybe we sit out and you know, we handle things as best we can for 2 years of Joe Biden's presidency. But then the midterms come around where they have to defend a lot of seats. Maybe they take the House back. Maybe they do well in the Senate. They're looking at 2, 3, 4 years down the road where obviously Donald Trump's agenda right now, his political future is dependent on what happens in the next 2, 3 days.
Yeah, and I have to tell you that the conversation in Washington is already turning to 2024. It is never too early to start discussing the next presidential election and who may or may not be running, depending, of course, as Anthony says, in the next 2 or 3 days. Anthony, Kellyanne Conway, the former senior advisor to Donald Trump, and somebody who remains, even though she's not in the White House anymore, remains very close to the president, has been on Fox News a few minutes ago saying that the president will address the state of the race from his perspective and his campaign's perspective. She said the campaign feels very good about the trajectory in Pennsylvania. The campaign, according to Kellyanne Conway, feels that Georgia will hold and that they like what's happening in Arizona and Nevada. She also said, this is interesting, that the president will hold to account a lot of the media pollsters who were wrong yet again. I mean, they have a fair criticism there, right, of the fact that yet again, for the second presidential election in a row, the polls were showing Joe Biden very comfortably ahead. Here we are, still in a counting position. Now, we're in a counting position partly because it takes time to count those mail-in ballots. But, and Joe Biden may still win this presidential election. But in each of these states, the margin is tighter than those polls would have led us to believe. And you can see why the president may take umbrage at what some of the polls were saying.
Yeah, the polls looked a lot more wrong on Tuesday night going into Wednesday morning than they do now. But you're right, the margins are much closer. There was a poll that came out a week before the election that showed a double-digit lead for Joe Biden in Wisconsin. Obviously, Joe Biden's going to win Wisconsin, but it's going to be single digits, low to mid single digits. Certainly not the margins that we saw there. Same with Pennsylvania, same with Michigan. Florida, it was looked like a toss-up, maybe a slight Joe Biden advantage, but Donald Trump is going to win Florida by, it looks like, 3 percentage points, which when you talk about how close Florida normally is, that is a blowout in that state. Georgia, we knew was going to be close. Georgia is close. North Carolina, it looked like Joe Biden had an advantage there. It looks like Donald Trump is going to win narrowly there. So there was also the national polls that showed Joe Biden with close to a double-digit lead, maybe 8% lead. Right now, it's looking like maybe a 4% lead. Still millions of more votes overall, and they're still counting a lot of ballots. And it's still going to have to wait for California, which is a gold mine for Democrats, for all of those ballots to be counted to see exactly how big a popular vote win this is going to be for Joe Biden. But I think there is going to be a reevaluation based on these polls and see how they once again underestimated Donald Trump's strength among his base, the ability to turn out his base, find new voters, and also maybe his support among Hispanic voters in places like Florida.
Yeah, and amongst some African Americans too, who turned out in bigger numbers actually for Donald Trump than they did in 2016. Not in any way in as bigger numbers as they did for Joe Biden, but he did make some inroads there. I spoke to Frank Luntz, who's a senior Republican pollster, yesterday when we were on air, and he was saying that the polling industry as a whole really is under some scrutiny. I mean, he's been very critical of his own polling industry. One thing he did say that's interesting is that he's found that people tend to be more honest in polls when they are online polls, i.e. when it's anonymous, when they don't have to talk to a person, they just have to punch, a button, and that, that is when poll surveyors are more honest. Let's bring in Ron Christie, former advisor to George W. Bush. Ron, thanks for joining us as we wait for the president to come out and speak at the White House. What do you expect the president to say this evening? What do you think he should be saying to the nation? This is the first time we have heard from him since you and I were on air on election night at 2 o'clock in the morning when he came out and said he had already won, he believed.
Well, good evening to you, Katty. I anticipate the President of the United States, knowing how Donald Trump operates, could not stand the notion that Vice President Biden came out and gave a brief address earlier today. So I anticipate what we're going to hear from him is he's going to give a state of what he thinks the presidential contest is, where his lawyers are, what his strategy is, and why he thinks he has a very narrow, very slim path to those 270 electoral college votes that you need to gain election to the presidency. I expect and anticipate a very feisty president, a very animated president, and I can hardly wait if he decides to open it up for question and answer to see what the press will ask him and how he will respond to it.
Ron, when the president came out in the East Room of the White House on the night of the election, 2 o'clock in the morning, and said, frankly, we already have won. I believe we already have won. Mm-hmm. It was quite shocking. I mean, a lot of people and Republicans I've spoken to felt that he went too far. You, I remember on air afterwards, said that was not appropriate. I mean, obviously, this is when the vote count is still going on. No candidate can claim they have won on either side 2 days after that. It's just not possible. It's not true to say that he had already won on election night. Do you think the president might have heard some of that pushback and row that back a little bit, dial that back a little bit this evening?
I do, and the reason for that...
And Ron, I'm going to interrupt you because here is Donald Trump coming to the podium. So let's take a listen to the president.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to provide the American people with an update on our efforts to protect the integrity of our very important 2020 election. If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late. I've already decisively won many critical states, including massive victories in Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio. To name just a few, we won these and many other victories despite historic election interference from big media, big money, and big tech. As everybody saw, we won by historic numbers. And the pollsters got it knowingly wrong. They got it knowingly wrong. We had polls that were so ridiculous, and everybody knew it at the time. There was no blue wave that they predicted. They thought there was going to be a big blue wave. That was false. That was done for suppression reasons. But instead, there was a big red wave, and it's been properly acknowledged, actually, by the media. They were, I think, very impressed, but that was after the fact. That doesn't do us any good. We kept the Senate despite having twice as many seats to defend as Democrats, and in a really much more competitive states, we did a fantastic job with the Senate. I think we're very proud of what's happened there. We had many more seats to defend. They spent almost $200 million on Senate races in South Carolina and Kentucky alone, 2 races, and hundreds of millions of dollars overall against us. At the national level, our opponents' major donors were Wall Street bankers and special interests. Our major donors were police officers, farmers, everyday citizens. Yet for the first time ever, we lost 0 races in the House. I was talking to Kevin McCarthy today. He said he couldn't believe it. 0 races, very unusual thing, 0. And actually won many new seats with, I think, many more on the way. This was also the year of the Republican woman. More Republican women were elected to Congress than ever before. That's a great achievement. I won the largest share of non-white voters of any Republican in 60 years, including historic numbers of Latino, African American, Asian American, and Native American voters, the largest ever in our history. We grew our party by 4 million voters, the greatest turnout in Republican Party history. Democrats are the party of the big donors, the big media, the big tech, it seems, and Republicans have become the party of the American worker, and that's what's happened. And we're also, I believe, the party of inclusion. As everyone now recognizes, media polling was election interference in the truest sense of that word by powerful special interests. These really phony polls, I have to call them phony polls, fake polls, were designed to keep our voters at home, create the illusion of momentum for Mr. Biden, and diminish Republicans' ability to raise funds. They were what's called suppression polls. Everyone knows that now. And it's never been used to the extent that it's been used on this last election. To highlight just a few examples, the day before election, Quinnipiac, which was wrong on every occasion that I know of, had Joe Biden up by 5 points in Florida, and they were off by 8.4 points, and I won Florida easily. So they had me losing Florida by a lot, and I ended up winning Florida by a lot. Other than that, they were very accurate. They had him up 4 points in Ohio, and they were up by 12.2 points. And I also won Ohio, great state of Ohio, very easily. The Washington Post had Biden up 17 points in Wisconsin, and it was basically even. They were off by about 17 points. And they knew that. They're not stupid people. They knew that. Suppression. There are now only a few states yet to be decided in the presidential race. The voting apparatus of those states are run in all cases by Democrats. We were winning in all the key locations by a lot, actually. And then our numbers started miraculously getting whittled away in secret. And they wouldn't allow legally permissible observers. We went to court in a couple of instances, and we were able to get the observers put in. And when the observers got there, they wanted them 60, 70 feet away, 80 feet, 100 feet away, or outside the building to observe people inside the building. And we won a case, a big case, and we have others happening. There are lots of litigation, even beyond our litigation. There's tremendous amount of litigation generally because of how unfair this process was. And I predicted that. I've been talking about mail-in voting for a long time. It's really destroyed our system. It's a corrupt system, and it makes people corrupt even if they aren't by nature, but they become corrupt. It's too easy. They want to find out how many votes they need, and then they seem to be able to find them. They wait, and then they find them. And you see that on election night. We were ahead in vote in North Carolina by a lot, tremendous number of votes. And we're still ahead by a lot, but not as many, because they're finding ballots all of a sudden. Oh, we have some mail-in ballots. It's amazing how those mail-in ballots are so one-sided, too. I know that it's supposed to be to the advantage of the Democrats, but in all cases, they're so one-sided. We were up by nearly 700,000 votes in Pennsylvania. I won Pennsylvania by a lot, and that gets whittled down to, I think they said now we're up by 90,000 votes, and they'll keep coming and coming and coming. They find them all over, and they don't want us to have any observers, although we won a court case. The judge said you have to have observers. Likewise in Georgia, and they're appealing. Actually, they're appealing. We won a case that we want people to watch, and we want observers, and they're actually appealing, which is sort of interesting. I wonder why they'd appeal, that all we want to do is have people watch as they do the vote tabulations. Likewise in Georgia, I won by a lot, with a lead of over getting close to 300,000 votes on election night in Georgia. And by the way, got whittled down, and now it's getting to be to a point where I'll go from winning by a lot to perhaps being even down a little bit. In Georgia, a pipe burst in a faraway location, totally unrelated to the location of what was happening, and they stopped counting for 4 hours, and a lot of things happened. The election apparatus in Georgia is run by Democrats. We also had margins of 300,000. In Michigan, we're way up in Michigan, won the state. And in Wisconsin, we did likewise fantastically well. And that got whittled down. In every case, they got whittled down. Today, we're on track to win Arizona. We only need to carry, I guess, 55% of the remaining vote, 55% margins, and that's a margin that we've significantly exceeded. So we'll see what happens with that, but we're on track to do okay in Arizona. Our goal is to defend the integrity of the election. We'll not allow the corruption to steal such an important election, or any election for that matter. And we can't allow anybody to silence our voters and manufacture results. I've been doing a lot of public things for a long time. I've never had anything that's been as inspirational, by people calling, talking, sending things to us. I've never seen such love and such affection and such spirit as I've seen for this. People know what's happening, and they see what's happening, and it's before their eyes. And there are many instances which will be reported very shortly. There's tremendous litigation going on, and this is a case where they're trying to steal an election. They're trying to rig an election, and we can't let that happen. Detroit and Philadelphia, known as two of the most corrupt political places anywhere in our country, easily cannot be responsible for engineering the outcome of a presidential race, a very important presidential race. In Pennsylvania, Democrats have gone to the state Supreme Court to try and ban our election observers, and very strongly. Now, we won the case, but they're going forward. They don't want anybody in there. They don't want anybody watching them as they count the ballots. And I can't imagine why. There's absolutely no legitimate reason why they would not want to have people watching this process, because if it's straight, they should be proud of it. Instead, they're trying, obviously, to commit fraud. There's no question about that. In Philadelphia, observers have been kept far away, very far away, so far that people are using binoculars to try and see, and there's been tremendous problems caused. They put paper on all of the windows so you can't see in, and the people that are banned are very unhappy and become somewhat violent. The 11th Circuit ruled that in Georgia, the votes have been in by Election Day, that they should be in by Election Day, and they weren't. Votes are coming in after Election Day. And they had a ruling already that you have to have the votes in by Election Day. To the best of my knowledge, votes should be in by Election Day. And they didn't do that. Democrat officials never believed they could win this election, honestly. I really believe that. That's why they did the mail-in ballots, where there's tremendous corruption and fraud going on. That's why they mailed out tens of millions of unsolicited ballots without any verification measures whatsoever. And I've told everybody that these things would happen, because I've seen it happen. I watched a lot of different elections before they decided to go with this big, massive election with tens of millions of ballots going out to everybody, in many cases totally unsolicited. This was unprecedented in American history. This was by design, despite years of claiming to care about the election security. They refused to include any requirement to verify signatures, identities, or even determine whether they're eligible or ineligible to vote. People are walking in there. They have no idea. They're just taking numbers. They're writing down things, the workers, and doing a lot of bad things. And we have a lot of information coming and litigation that you'll see that will shake even you people up. And you've seen it all. The officials overseeing the counting in Pennsylvania and other key states are all part of a corrupt Democrat machine that you've written about. And for a long time, you've been writing about the corrupt Democrat machine. I went to school there, and I know A lot about it hasn't changed. It's a long time ago and hasn't changed. It's gotten worse. In Pennsylvania, partisan Democrats have allowed ballots in the state to be received 3 days after the election. And we think much more than that. And they're counting those without even postmarks or any identification whatsoever. So you don't have postmarks, you don't have identification. There have been a number of disturbing irregularities across the nation. Our campaign has been denied access to observe any counting in Detroit. Detroit is another place, and I wouldn't say it has the best reputation for election integrity. Poll workers in Michigan were duplicating ballots, but when our observers attempted to challenge the activity, those poll workers jumped, blocked their view so that they couldn't see what they were doing. And it became a little bit dangerous. One major hub for counting ballots in Detroit covered up the windows again with large pieces of cardboard. And so they wanted to protect and block the counting area. They didn't want anybody seeing the counting, even though these were observers who were legal observers that were supposed to be there. In Detroit, there were hours of unexplained delay in delivering many of the votes for counting. The final batch did not arrive until 4 in the morning. And even though the polls closed at 8 o'clock, so they brought it in, and the batches came in, and nobody knew where they came from. We've also been denied access to observe in critical places in Georgia. In multiple swing states, counting was halted for hours and hours on election night, with results withheld from major Democrat-run locations only to appear later, and they suddenly appeared, and they all had the name Biden on them, or just about all. I think almost all. They all had the name Biden on them, which is a little strange. I challenge Joe and every Democrat to clarify that they only want legal votes, because they talk about votes, and I think they should use the word legal votes. We want every legal vote counted, and I want every legal vote counted. We want openness and transparency, no secret count rooms, no mystery ballots, no illegal votes being cast after Election Day. You have Election Day, and the laws are very strong on that. You have an Election Day, and they don't want votes cast after Election Day, and they want the process to be an honest one. It's so important. We want an honest election, and we want an honest count, and we want honest people working back there, because it's a very important job. So that's the way this country is going to win. That's the way the United States will win. And we think we will win the election very easily. We think there's going to be a lot of litigation because we have so much evidence, so much proof, and it's going to end up perhaps at the highest court in the land. We'll see. But we think there'll be a lot of litigation because we can't have an election stolen like this. And I tell you, I have been talking about this for many months with all of you. And I've said very strongly that mail-in ballots are going to end up being a disaster. Small elections were a disaster. Small, very easy to handle elections were disastrous. This is a large-scale version, and it's getting worse and worse every day. We're hearing stories that are horror stories, absolute horror stories. And we can't let that happen to the United States of America. It's not a question of who wins, Republican, Democrat, Joe, myself. We can't let that happen to our country. We can't be disgraced by having something like this happen. So it will be hopefully cleared up, maybe soon, I hope soon, but it'll probably go through a process, a legal process. And as you know, I've claimed certain states, and he's claiming states, and we can both claim the states, but ultimately I have a feeling judges are going to have to rule. But there's been a lot of shenanigans, and we can't stand for that in our country. Thank you very much.
Okay, Donald Trump there leaving the White House press briefing room after speaking for about half an hour. He came out, and the first words he said were, "If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they will try to steal it from us." We should point out that these things are not true. The votes that are being counted at the moment are perfectly legal votes. No one has been declared a winner. No one can declare themselves a winner yet, because not enough legal votes have been counted yet to get either of the candidates above 270.